Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. Coming up in this edition, the 1 millionth Syrian refugee is registered in Lebanon. At least 3 million have fled their homeland since the start of the conflict. And now a devastating drought is making matters even worse. Israeli-Palestinian peace talks continue to stutter. The possible release of a spy imprisoned in the US could, however, get the conversation flowing again. And well, it takes two to tango, and that is literally what one man has chosen to use as a tool for peace, choreographing troops of trust between young Arabs and Jews in Jaffa. US brokered negotiations between Israeli and Palestinian officials broke down once again last week. Israel failed to release a group of Palestinian prisoners as had been promised. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas responded by signing global treaties on behalf of the state of Palestine, immediately angering Israel. Both sides, officials say, are committed to narrowing the gap dividing them. In a bid to breathe new life into the choking peace talks, the US may be willing to release a man sentenced to life in prison back in 1987, convicted of working as a spy for Israel. Mariam Saab has the story.
To many Israelis, he's a national hero, but to most Americans, he's a no-good turncoat who betrayed his oath and country. A polarizing figure, Jonathan Pollard's name has been roped into negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis once again. In 1984, the former US naval intelligence analyst provided stacks of classified documents to Israel. He was arrested in November of 1985 and sentenced to life in prison for espionage. Locked away in a US jail for almost 30 years with a lifetime to go, the 59-year-old American Jew could now be released as an incentive to peace talks. If the US decides to release Pollard, Israel would have to undertake significant concessions to the Palestinians. And on the Palestinians' part, it could breathe new life into the fight to free one of their high-profile nationals, Marwan Barghouti, imprisoned in Israel and sentenced for his role in Palestinian uprisings.
But the Israelis should understand that in the same way that they're requesting that one of their soldiers, in this case Jonathan Pollard, was sent by the Israeli to spy on the United States. For the Palestinian, for the thousands of Palestinians, it's very important to see their own son, father, brother being released. So for the same reason that Israelis request the liberation of Jonathan Pollard, the Palestinians have totally the right to request more liberation of Palestinian prisoners.
It's not the first time Benjamin Netanyahu has used peace talks to barter for Pollard's freedom. In 1998, the Israeli Prime Minister pressed for his release in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners. But at the time, President Bill Clinton rejected the request after fierce opposition from US intelligence officials. All Israeli prime ministers since then have lobbied hard for the release of the spy. More recently, in late last year, Israel tried to use the NSA eavesdropping scandal as an opportunity to put the issue back on the table.
It's quite embarrassing between countries who are allies. And I think that this moment, more than at any other moment, it's just natural that Jonathan Pollard will be released.
Just 3 weeks shy of the deadline for Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations, the release of Jonathan Pollard is still just a whisper, but one that's loud and urgent enough to elicit a response from the White House.
First of all, the president has not made a decision to release Jonathan Pollard. Jonathan Pollard was convicted of espionage, and he is serving his sentence.
It's a risky move that the US might be desperate enough to take, after months of diplomacy on John Kerry's part appears to have reached a dead end.
A major drought that could cut crop production and shriveling supplies of food aid available, the humanitarian crisis in Syria is going from what was already hellish to even worse. The World Food Programme says only half of donations pledged have actually been handed over, and so they are struggling to offer anything substantial to the over 4 million Syrians currently needing emergency rations. With half of the population displaced, the exodus is now thought to be around the 3 million mark, and that's just the refugees registered abroad. Neighbouring countries are struggling to cope with the influx.
This is the millionth Syrian refugee to be registered in Lebanon by the United Nations. 18-year-old Yahya fled from the Syrian city of Homs.
It's a shame. That means 1 million people suffered before me. We were all surprised by the conditions of life here in Lebanon. Most families prefer to live under the bombs than under these conditions.
Since the war began 3 years ago, Lebanon now has the highest per capita concentration of refugees in the world. 1 million refugees is 2,500 new people per day, more than one per minute. Half of them are children. Today, these men, women and children now represent a quarter of the Lebanese population.
The extent of the human tragedy is not just a resuscitation of numbers, but each one of these numbers represents a human life. They've lost their family members. They've lost their sense of future.
Most refugees have found shelter in camps like these. Nearly 80,000 of them need emergency care. Some families are lucky enough to receive monthly food aid, but with resources overstretched, many are left to fend for themselves.
We urge the United Nations to help us get the papers we need to become legal residents. We're afraid of being arrested.
The humanitarian appeal for Lebanon is desperately underfunded at just 14% of the $1.83 billion needed. According to the World Bank, the Syrian crisis has cost Lebanon $2.5 billion in lost activity in 2013 and threatens to plunge 170,000 Lebanese into poverty by the end of this year.
A national election that is planning to exclude major cities. Electoral officials in Iraq have announced that ballot boxes will not be brought to part of the Sunni-dominated Anbar province. The move is a security measure as Iraqi forces try and regain control of the areas overrun by al-Qaeda-linked militants. But it could increase Sunni fears of being cast aside by the Shiite majority. It will be the first vote since US troops withdrew, and Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is hoping to clinch a third term.
Baghdad is plastered with campaign posters. Candidates for parliamentary elections at the end of April have begun canvassing the Iraqi capital as they kick off a month of official campaigning.
We have divided Baghdad into different areas, and we are targeting the areas where we have the most supporters. We're putting up posters and speaking to groups of people, but in the end, it will be the citizens' choice.
Some 9,000 candidates are competing for 328 seats in the Council of Representatives. No single bloc is expected to win a majority, though Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's Shiite-dominated State of Law alliance is seen as the front-runner.
There are some new faces, but these are the same old people, and there is no need for them to fill the streets with posters.
I hope people will take part in the upcoming elections and choose the best candidates who will make changes in the country's best interest.
The poll was put at risk when Iraq's election commissioners threatened to resign over what they said was political and judicial interference in their work and the exclusion of certain candidates.
The influential parties are in control of state institutions and of electoral propaganda, and this puts the electoral and campaign process into question.
The stakes are high for Maliki as he seeks re-election. His second term has been marred by a surge in sectarian violence that's killed more than 2,200 people this year alone. Maliki's ruling Shiite party has been accused of oppressing and targeting the country's Sunni minority, and security is the top priority for many prospective voters. They also want politicians to tackle high levels of unemployment and rampant corruption, as well as widespread problems with electricity and running water.
Breaking down political, religious and social barriers one dance step at a time. International ballroom dancing champion Pierre Dulin is teaching Arab, Israeli and Jewish children how to trust each other and unite through dance. His efforts have been recorded in a documentary called Dancing in Jaffa. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has the report.
I was born in Jaffa, but we left when I was 4 years old. And what I can give back to children is ballroom dancing.
Pierre Dulaine hadn't set foot in his hometown for 66 years. He left Jaffa with his Palestinian parents after the creation of the Israeli state. As an adult, he became an international champion in ballroom dancing, living all over the world. But Pierre returned to the Middle East 2 years ago with one very special project in mind.
We need to have your children dance with children from another school. Palestinian and Jewish children together.
May I have this dance, please?
A gargantuan task that Pierre took in his stride, convinced that these children from different communities could come together through dance.
For the Muslims, it was extremely difficult because the girls don't dance with boys. We had a chat with the parents, and then, yes, it was okay.
For 3 months, Pierre and the film crew went from school to school in Jaffa, meeting Jewish, Arab and mixed classes of children.
It was incredible for me to realize to what extent the two communities are separated. The fact that Ala and many other children in his school don't speak Hebrew.
Fostering open-mindedness and tolerance through ballroom dancing, Pierre Dulaine's project has made a real breakthrough in Jaffa and beyond.
Well, it's on that positive note that we'll leave it for this week. Don't forget you can catch it all again on our website, france24.com. Feel free to leave us your comments and questions too. Until next time, do take care.